If you cannot understand my argument and declare it's all Greek to me, if you claim to be more sinned against than sinning, if you recall your salad days, if you act more in sorrow than in anger, if your wish is father to the thought, if your lost property has vanished into thin air, you are quoting Shakespeare. If you've ever refused to budge an inch or suffered from green-eyed jealousy, if you have played fast and loose, been tongue-tied, a tower of strength, hoodwinked, or in a pickle, if you have knitted your brows, made a virtue of necessity, insisted on fair play, slept not one wink, stood on ceremony, danced attendance on your lord and master, laughed yourself into stitches, had short shrift, cold comfort, or too much of a good thing, if you have seen better days or lived in a fool's paradise, why, be that as it may, the more fool you, for it is a foregone conclusion that you are, as good luck would have it, quoting Shakespeare.
Shakespeare used 17,677 different words over the course of his plays, narrative poems, and sonnets. When he was writing his plays at the end of the 1500s and beginning of the 1600s, the English language was still relatively young, pliable, and rapidly evolving. Experts argue about how many words Shakespeare invented or contributed to the English language, but most believe that he can be credited with the first written usage of up to 10% of the words he wrote, so about 1,700 words. Does this mean he truly made them up, in the sense that they didn't exist at all before he wrote them down? Probably not. Some of them were most likely floating around in the London air, so to speak, being used in casual conversation. It's possible that Shakespeare was simply the playwright who wrote these words down in the first documents that survived to the modern day. Still, some of them he seems to have completely invented, and others he seems to have taken and used differently on the page than any other writer, by turning a noun into a verb, for example. In 1608, he wrote in King Lear the sentence, "A sovereign shame so elbows him." The word elbow had existed as a noun for several hundred years, but had not, to our knowledge, been used as a verb until Shakespeare repurposed it. Similarly, in Richard II, he writes, "Within my mouth you have my tongue enjailed." Notice how much less impact the line might have if he'd written, "Within my mouth, you have my tongue put in jail." This illustrates just one of the ways that Shakespeare uses language in unexpected ways that catch our ears, as well as our minds. Like enjailed, some of the other words he invented aren't used in common speech today, but many have survived and become integrated into modern English. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the list includes these words: bandit in Henry VI, Part 2 in 1594, critic, Love's Labour's Lost in 1598, dauntless, Henry VI, Part 3 in 1616, lonely, Coriolanus in 1616, lackluster, As You Like It in 1616, dwindle, Henry IV, Part 1 in 1598, swagger, Midsummer in 1600, and uncomfortable, Romeo and Juliet in 1599. And this is just a few from the long list not mentioned by Jane Lapater at the top of this lesson. Now let's do a little experiment with Brooke and Cam to try to further understand some other ways creative language and use of poetic imagery affects our ears.
I love you.
I love you more.
I love you the most. Like peanut butter loves jelly.
I love you so much that it hurts my heart.
How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach when feeling out of sight.
My bounty is as boundless as the sea, my love as deep. The more I give to thee, the more I have, for both are infinite.
Thanks, Brooke and Cam. Each of the sentences in that exchange contained a declaration of love. What did you notice? What sentences jumped out at you? Let's talk about the words Brooke and Cam just used. Because I love you can be a powerful statement all by itself, right? But Brooke one-upped Cam by using an adjective, saying she loved him more. The Elizabeth Barrett Browning poem, which uses poetic language to heighten our emotional response. And then finally, the Shakespeare lines, where Juliet uses a metaphor to compare her love to something as huge as the vast ocean. The human ear seems to instinctively respond to hearing imagery that soars above the way we ordinarily use and hear language. Whether we hear the elevated language in a play, or we hear a loved one say something beautiful and romantic to us in real life. Words can make us feel different emotions. And when words are well used, they can make us feel emotions in a heightened way. But in addition to the warm, fuzzy feeling we might get when we hear some beautiful poetic language, Shakespeare's language also makes our brains fire in unusual ways. According to scientists, his work actually alters the way our brain responds to written words. Research at the University of Liverpool in 2006 found that Shakespearean language excites a specific kind of brain activity. Because he uses unusual sentence structure, such as using a noun as a verb or arranging the subject and predicate of his sentences in an unexpected order, our brains have to process his language differently than we process usual expected sentence structure. It has to sort of jump a hoop and circle back in order to understand the meaning. According to Professor Neil Roberts, instead of confusing our brains, the linguistic gymnastics required to understand Shakespeare actually creates a different kind of brain activity, which might help explain why Shakespeare plays have such a dramatic impact on their readers and audiences. Our brains have to constantly rework the information coming in and establish different connections to understand Shakespeare. So our hearts respond to his poetic imagery, and our brains respond to his surprising sentence structure. This has led some people, including me, to argue that reading Shakespeare or experiencing one of his plays on stage is actually good for us. His poetic form makes us feel heightened emotion, and his sentence structure elicits unusual brain activity, which keeps us nimble. Let's have our actors explore some examples of Shakespeare's rich imagery. Cam, can you start with Claudio's speech from Measure for Measure? Here, Claudio contemplates his own death sentence.
Aye, but to die and go we know not where, to lie in cold obstruction and to rot, this sensible warm motion to become a kneaded clod, and the delighted spirit to bathe in fiery floods, or to reside in thrilling region of thick ribbed ice. To being prisoned in the viewless winds and blown with restless violence round about the pendant world, or to be worse than worst, those that lawless and uncertain thought. Imagine howling. 'Tis too horrible. The weariest and most loathed worldly life that age, ache, penury, and imprisonment can lay on nature is a paradise to what we fear of death.
Thanks, Cam. Notice what words or images stand out to you. What kind of feeling does the speech give you as you listen? Let's take that speech apart. There's not a full punctuation stop like a period or exclamation point until pretty late in the speech. But Cam, what feels like the first full thought?
Aye, but to die, and go we know not where, to lie in cold obstruction and to rot, this sensible, warm motion to become a kneaded clod, and the delighted spirit to bathe in fiery floods, or to reside in thrilling region of thick ribbed ice.
Good. And what does it mean? What is he contemplating?
He's contemplating his own death, even considering where we actually go after we die.
Yeah, this speech has that in common with Hamlet's famous to be or not to be speech. But Claudio seems frightened. He's using nightmarish imagery like to lie in cold obstruction and to rot, which is a pretty vivid and disturbing image. Now let's look at the rest of the speech. What's next?
To be imprisoned in the viewless winds and blown with restless violence round about the pendant world, or to be worse than worst of those that lawless and uncertain thought imagine howling. 'Tis too horrible.
What I notice about this section is that it gets very active, with verbs like imprisoned, blown with restless violence, and howling. Very evocative images. Cam, how does it feel to say those words?
Well, it makes you want to make the most out of the words, right? Even the word howling makes you want to shape your mouth around that so you can actually get the real feel of the anguish of a howl.
Yes. Claudio uses some very alliterative language. Listen to the W sounds in world, worse, and worst. Those repetitious consonant sounds are an opportunity for the actor and can help make the most of the images in the speech. Alliteration, of course, refers to repetitive consonant sounds at the fronts of words, usually 3 or more in a row, like from forth the fatal loins of these two foes in the prologue to Romeo and Juliet. And assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds in multiple words close together. Shakespeare regularly uses both to create evocative sound and mood. And then at the end of the speech, Claudio sums it all up. Cam, can you please read the end of that speech again?
The weariest and most loathed worldly life that age, ache, penury, and imprisonment can lay on nature is a paradise to what we fear of death.
Okay, so that's his ultimate thesis, right? That whatever challenges we face in life, age, penury, imprisonment, it's all nothing compared to our horror and fear of death. Thanks, Cam. Great work. Let's look at another speech, this time with Brooke. This is Titania the Fairy Queen from A Midsummer Night's Dream. She's talking about the fight that she and Oberon, the king of the fairies, have gotten into, and all the ways it's ruining the earth. Apparently, fairy fights are much more powerful than mortal fights.
These are the forgeries of jealousy. And never since the middle summer spring met we on hill, in dale, forest, or mead, by paved fountain or by rushy brook, or in the beached margent of the sea, to dance our ringlets to the whistling wind. But with thy brawls thou hast disturbed our sport. Therefore the winds, piping to us in vain, as in revenge, have sucked up from the sea contagious fogs, which falling in the land have every pelting river made so proud that they have overborne their continents.
Thanks, Brooke. The beginning describes where the fairies usually hang out or meet up, and she does it by using pretty fabulous imagery to make us feel what those places might be like. Brooke, what words and what specific sounds in the words stand out as opportunities for the actor?
I love when she says rushy brook. It sounds like what the water sounds of a brook would sound like. And to dance our ringlets to the whistling wind, it has that sound of the wind whistling by to it.
Exactly. So you can use the sounds of the words to paint the imagery for the audience. Now let's look at the next section, starting with therefore the winds piping to us in vain. Again, after describing the places, the imagery now gets more active and uses strong verbs to affect the audience.
Therefore the winds, piping to us in vain, as in revenge, have sucked up from the sea contagious fogs, which falling in the land have every pelting river made so proud that they have overborne their continents.
Good. Brooke, what does that language make you want to do vocally?
You just want to really use the consonant sounds, the piping and sucked and falling and even pelting river made so proud.
Yes. And you can make sure to hit the alliterative sounds and rainy rhythm of hath every pelting river made so proud. Shakespeare uses sounds that help the actor tell the story. Thanks, Brooke. Shakespeare also heightens his imagery by making effective use of linguistic devices like metaphors and similes. Metaphors compare one thing to another, where the comparison is not literally applicable, like Romeo saying that the light coming from the window is the east, and Juliet is the sun. And in Hamlet, for example, Shakespeare writes, "But look, the morn in russet mantle clad walks o'er the dew of yon high eastern hill." Comparing the break of day to a person clad in a russet-colored coat walking across the dew helps the audience see the image more vividly. And he does something similar in Romeo and Juliet. "Look, love, what envious streaks do lace the severing clouds in yonder east. Night's candles are burnt out, and jocund day stands tiptoe on the misty mountain tops." Imagining the daybreak like a person on tiptoe on the mountain tops likewise gives the audience a familiar way to visualize what he's talking about. A simile, of course, uses the words like or as to make its comparison. Romeo does that in the balcony scene too, when he says, "O speak again, bright angel, for thou art as glorious to this night being o'er my head as is a winged messenger of heaven." Picturing Juliet as a winged messenger gives us a very vivid idea of how Romeo envisions her. And Juliet, waiting for Romeo to come back to her later in the play, says, "So tedious is this day as is the night before some festival to an impatient child that hath new robes and may not wear them." In her case, the audience is invited to imagine or even remember what it feels like to be an impatient child waiting for something exciting to happen. So it's clear that the actor must also conjure these images, and maybe even their own memories, clearly in their own imaginations, in order to make the most of them and fully share them with the audience. Through our exploration today, we learned that in addition to understanding the given circumstances of the play and digging into the characters' objectives and motivations, actors also spend a lot of time in rehearsal thinking about the sounds of Shakespeare's words, which can teach them how to say the words and even what the pace of certain lines should sound like. Actors rehearsing Shakespeare also routinely spend time examining metaphors, similes, and many other kinds of powerful verbal devices he uses to create imagery for his audience. And once actors get used to looking for these kinds of clues in Shakespeare's texts, they often start to notice them in modern texts too. So learning to act Shakespeare makes actors more attuned to the language used by playwrights in other genres. So we've reached the end of Lesson 8. And with all of this knowledge under our belt, we're now ready to delve deeper into some larger scene rehearsals. We'll see you in the rehearsal studio in Lesson 9 as our actors begin to prep for the final performances you'll see at the end of the course.